morning, everyone, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's monthly webinar series, the Forum Roundtable. My name is Lauri Regan, and I'll be moderating insightful and informative discussions with leading experts on relevant and current events surrounding the Middle East and U.S. national security. I hope that you all have followed MEF's superb daily coverage of the Israel-Iran war. During the 12-day war, MEF provided regular, insightful programming, live and up-to-the-minute analyses, and many of its experts have been appearing regularly on newscasts and writing articles appearing in a wide array of publications. We continue our in-depth analysis today with three brilliant experts discussing what an Israel victory over Iran could look like, the role of the United States in achieving both U.S. and Israeli goals, the future of Iran, and the impact of all of this in the region more broadly. Victoria Coates is the Vice President of the Kathryn and Shelby Cullom Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation, who recently wrote the book, The Battle for the Jewish State, How Israel and America Can Win. John Hanna is the Randi and Charles Wax Senior Fellow at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America's Gemunder Center for Defense and Strategy. And Behnam Ben Taleblu is the Iran Program Senior Director and Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Today's program will be recorded and available for viewing. I urge you all to share it far and wide, and I urge you to continue following and supporting the Middle East Forum and promoting all of its critically important work and programming within your networks. Welcome, Victoria, John, and Behnam, and thanks so much for joining us today, as I know how busy you all are at this historic time, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Victoria, thank you. Victoria, I'm going to start with you because while I was going to title today's program Israel Victory in line with your book, I changed it to A Team Like No Team Before, which is based on President Trump's speech last Saturday evening after the U.S. struck Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. And he praised the strong relationship between the U.S. and Israel and between him and Bibi. Your book was written about Hamas and the other terrorist group that invaded Israel on October 7th. And it focused on Israel winning the battle with the Palestinians, including Iranian terror proxies. But it also was, during Biden's term and alluded to a lot of the Obama daylight between our two nations. A theme throughout the book is the importance of the strong U.S.-Israel relationship. And I think that we can all agree that Israel most likely would not have struck Iran if we were living under a Harris-Walz administration, and nor would Trump have ordered the U.S. military's involvement had Israel not had such great success in the 10 days leading up to that action. Okay, so here we are with members of the MAGA movement now, both pre and post the U.S. attack, and members of the Democrat Party who are screaming and yelling about a World War III, and they don't understand how important the fact that Israel was actually fighting on behalf of the U.S. and the West more broadly. So I'm going to ask you, and before I move on to allowing you to respond to this, I want to quote you, Victoria, because you were at the JNS conference in Jerusalem last month, and you stated, we also very strongly believe, we meaning Heritage, a strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities does not result necessarily in war. That is not a given. The Israelis have done this twice before, no war. I think we need to be obviously very cautious and judicious about our use of force, but we also can't scare ourselves into inaction. So, Victoria, can you just elaborate on that statement and spend some time with our audience talking about why a U.S.-Israel relationship is so critically important, a strong relationship, and why the U.S. strike projected strength as opposed to being something horrible that everybody's screaming and yelling about?
Well, thank you, Laurie. It's great to be with you and John and Behnam for this very important discussion. I was looking forward to it particularly because I haven't wrapped my head around the events of the last 2 weeks, really, since Israel started this action against Iran and then the U.S. intervention and what all of this means for the future. And a couple of quick points. One of the very striking features of this period has been the at least tacit approval of the region. I think pretty much all of the GCC permitted Israel to use their airspace, participated in shooting down Iranian projectiles that came through their airspace. There was the occasional minor press release condemnation, but then when the Iranians attacked Al-Udeid, everybody, including the Palestinian Authority, came out and condemned the Iranians for that attack. And you had Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and UAE all standing in solidarity with their Qatari brothers. I mean, that is Iran bringing people together that are not normally in the same canoe. So So that was very striking because, a lot of the naysayers about this say, if you attack Iran, there's going to be a regional war. The Arabs will take this as an excuse to attack Israel. The Americans will get dragged in. That's kind of the recipe for World War III. Well, that didn't happen. And I appreciate your quoting the JNS speech. We have a report at Heritage called Peace Through Strength, which basically makes the point that there is a choice between World War III and do nothing. That peace through strength doesn't mean peace at all cost. And I think the president demonstrated that pretty adeptly this week, with the decisive show of force and the rather shameful media circus that followed it, trying to paint it as ineffective. And we can go into that later if you want. But then the next two actions he took were diplomatic. The Hague summit with the historic commitment to defense spending by NATO allies, and then the Rwanda DRC deal that will be inked later today if it hasn't already been signed, bringing an end to a 30-year war. So it's not like he's running around the world dropping bombs. Yes, he will use force when he has to, and I think that was the conclusion they made about the Iran strike. But he would rather use diplomacy, and he can be very successful doing that. So I think that in terms of the U.S.-Israel relationship specifically is extremely helpful. And last point is, the integration of Israel into CENTCOM, which we initiated in late 2019. To the Biden camp's credit, they slowed it down, but they didn't prevent it. So that happened in September of 21. So by the time we got, a little bit more than a year ago to the direct Iran strike on Israel, we had really seamless military coordination, which between the United States and Israel, much more effective than when Israel had been in UCOM. But then also, that's the whole region. So everybody's present in Tampa. They can all coordinate, kind of behind the scenes, but they can coordinate. And that was replicated in October. So you could see those as kind of trial runs for the Iranian attacks. And it's why I think we were able to be so effective now. And that is what the world needs to see. They need to see that this is a very tight relationship. There's no daylight between us, and we're incredibly effective in a way that no Chinese vassal state and China could be effective. No Russian vassal state. I mean, can you imagine Belarus pulling off something like this? I don't think so. So that is a really important message, not just to Iran, which I think is reeling from it, but also to the rest of the world.
Thank you. There was a tweet that Steve Bannon sent out. I don't know if you all saw it, but he basically called Israel, I don't think vassal state was the word, but it insinuated the same thing. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. John, there's a lot of frustration in both the camp that supports Trump's foreign policies as well as those who don't. People can't really figure out what he's thinking and what his next moves are going to be. And I think that people find that very frustrating. In the case of this 12-day war, both Israel and the U.S. used deception masterfully to achieve the goals. And I would call both Trump and Bibi geniuses in their coordination. And like Trump said, a team like no team before. But now there's a ceasefire, and it seems like that came from Trump. I think we all understand Israel's goals in this war was to destroy Iran's nukes and ballistic missile systems, and to neuter the proxies that Iran was supporting and that had surrounded Israel in their ring of fire. But can you discuss what you believe Trump's goals were and continue to be, and what his long-term strategy may be for the region, given that a number of experts believe that the ceasefire was premature? And this is especially since we don't even know yet, what was destroyed, despite rumors, how far back the nuke program was set, and whether they still have highly enriched uranium stores, the status of the ballistic missile program. And we do know that Iran did have one of the largest ballistic missile arsenals in the Middle East. So what are your, other than calming things down in the region, which Trump has continually said, and he's been evasive about regime change, do you have a sense of what he might be planning for the region, and perhaps share what you would like to see him do in the coming weeks and months? There's a lot of rumors about expansion of the Abraham Accords, for instance.
Thank you, Laurie. Great to be with my colleagues here, who I haven't seen some of them in a long time. So wonderful to see you all. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Um, Listen, I certainly don't claim to be an expert on Donald Trump. Victoria knows the president far better than I do, so I'm kind of guessing and speculating here from a distance. I do have a sense that the man is, when he looks at the Middle East, he's interested in it. All the talk about neo-isolationism, pulling back from the world, that may be an element in MAGA. I don't think it's necessarily any part of the president's vision of America's role in the world or his role in the world on a personal matter. And I think the Middle East is of great interest to him for a whole variety of reasons, not least because there's a lot of money to be made there. But I think he sees it as also, he's looking at this on a quite grand regional landscape, that this is a place where serious deals, big deals, historic deals are possible, not only in the economic realm, but on the diplomatic realm, and a chance to do things that none of his predecessors have managed to do. I think the legacy of the Abraham Accords for him is an extremely important one. He understands both how important that was for the United States, for the Middle East, and for his own personal legacy as the commander in chief and president of the world's greatest power. So I think that's the way he is looking at the Middle East right now. We obviously saw that on his trip in May. Big economic deals, beneficial to the region, beneficial to the United States. And I think he's approaching the region's major conflicts that way, in terms of ending the Iranian nuclear program, maybe even being able to bring Iran back into the community of nations as rather than a revolutionary cause, as a normal nation looking out for its own interests rather than looking to destroy others. That may be a bridge too far. I personally think it probably is in any short-term time frame, but I think the president thinks in those terms. He doesn't have any permanent enemies. And if people are willing to play ball on his terms and make good deals, he's willing to deal with anybody. But I think obviously the conflict in Gaza, he wants to be able to bring to an end, to bring those hostages home, to really isolate and keep Hamas away, and do something bigger on the broader Palestinian question that's good for Israel, good for Palestinians. And then, of course, I think he does see this grand, all leading up to this grand diplomatic deal that he does with regard to the broader Israeli-Arab conflict, the expanding and deepening the Abraham Accords, and at the center of that is bringing together Saudi Arabia, the world's most influential, powerful, richest Arab state and Muslim state, together with the world's only Jewish state, and he's the one orchestrating all of that. And if it requires a discrete, powerful display of American power to bring people to their senses, to build the kind of leverage that he needs over Iran, if they're weren't willing to come to the table on his terms before that strike, maybe after that strike, and what America and Israel have done to the country, I think he genuinely believes, and has believed over the last 2 weeks, that this will get Iran into a position where it's prepared to drop its own extremist red lines regarding its nuclear weapons program and come to the table on his terms. That's what any a rational New York business developer would do if they found themselves in the position that Iran is in right now. So whether or not any of this, part of it, all of it, is achievable, I do think that the president has a notion of a grand vision of where he thinks he might have a chance to bring this region over the next few years. I think you have to admire him for that ambition. I think you should probably recognize it. He's not a man only thinking about what happens tomorrow, what happens with what's directly in front of me. I do think he's got a grander strategic tableau that he's trying to develop and paint here, and we'll have to see whether he can get there. But I think what he did over the last 2 weeks, both in support of Israel and then that powerful application of American force last Saturday night to bring this war to at least the current conclusion, I think he's played it very well, and in the scheme of trying to begin to map out this broader vision. And I think it looks like he's beginning to turn some serious attention to the issue now of Gaza, of the Palestinian question, how we get that resolved, and then thinking about that grand deal with the Saudis and Israel and the broader ending the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Thanks, John. And we're going to follow on this point a bit more, and I'm going to refer to an interview that you gave recently, and you've given a lot of interviews recently. You noted that the U.S. keeps getting sucked back into the Middle East because, quote, everyone has tried to manage rather than solve the Iran threat. So that was prior to Trump's authorization of U.S. military force in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Can you explain what you meant by that statement? And did these 12 days solve the threat in your view? Or are we now at least on our way to solving it? Or do you fear that this will ultimately result in back to square one in 5 years? Is that a possibility? Could this be a missed opportunity to not completely finish off all of Iran's military capabilities?
Great. Thank you so much, Lauri. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Apologies for the little tight internet lag there. But it's always an honor and a privilege to be back with Lauri and the folks at MEF, but especially friends and former colleagues, if I may be so bold, Victoria and John. I listen and learn so much from everything you read and write and say, both in public and private. So thank you for doing what you guys do as well, and Lauri and MEF for convening this very timely panel. Let me just say, it was very nice that you were, cherry picking and listening to some of those interviews, Lauri, because, on occasion, you say so much or I say so much about Iran that I really do wonder, is anyone other than my mother listening? And it's nice to know that we're not speaking into a void or into a chasm. But I said that because I've watched America really strive and also struggle in the post 9/11 Middle East, and strive and struggle, actually, like many Middle Eastern powers in the pre-modern and modern era have, to build a better political order on the back end of a military success. And I'm talking about these two drastically different things because when contesting the Islamic Republic for so many years, for nearly 2 decades, the US and the Israelis, forgive me, but were not permitted even to think about real military options, even though the US and the Israelis, and even many of our Arab partners, faced real military threats. So much of that changed with October 7 and the multiple boom and bust cycles of violence in the post-October 7 Middle East that led to the first 2 direct Israel-Iran exchanges and ultimately the war that we have just seen in June, the 12-day war. Now, where America gets at the intersection of that is, traditionally it has the privilege of distance, the luxury of geography, the luxury of overwhelming conventional firepower. It's a tech power and an industrial power at the same time. So it need not have had to work to solve rather than manage by virtue of these capabilities that it had. But nonetheless, its attempts to manage, its consistent dealing with the fires rather than the arsonist, has put it in this position that when it does have to enter, it's going to have to enter in a big way. Now, Donald Trump just showed that even the big way can still play to those technical and military capabilities that the U.S. has. You may have heard what the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff recently said about the folks at DSHRA who spent spent years, I think almost 15 years, just working one target. It made me laugh. I'm certainly not a government employee, certainly not as capable as the Ditra folk, but John Hanna knows I've spent years just looking at one or two different types of Iranian missiles. So it's always interesting when you see people inside the bureaucracy be able to devote all their resources, all their assets to getting one thing right. Now, I think the challenge the president will have is how to build off of the last thing that John said, which is how do you build off of that successful use of military force for those larger political goals? Because there is something of a, forgive me, caricature that exists of the president that is the New York real estate guy looking for transaction. And there are so many interesting and well-written essays about American foreign policy, term one, term two, in the era of Trump, in the era of post-Bush, post-Obama, that talk about a more limited, judicious approach to everything. But in reality, when you look at the threats that we face, when you look at the costs of inaction, when you look at the changing geopolitical landscape, and then most importantly to what John mentioned right at the tail end, when you look at the personal political appetite of President Trump, you actually land squarely in transformation. You land squarely in the world of transformation rather than transaction. And just, as an Iranian American, I'll say it's been a little odd that he's hit the nail on the head when it comes to transformation and all the other big picture issues. Victoria mentioned, how moving Israel from EUCOM into CENTCOM really set the predicate for a decade plus of, missile defense and allied base hardening and all the stuff that got us to the successful intercepts of 2024 and 2025. All of those things were worthwhile risks. But for some reason, going over the edge and being able to call a spade, sans one tweet in term two about a different political order in Tehran, and let me touch the third rail here, regime change still has not been said, even though everything that we face comes from this regime. I mean, if you look at the history of even just the kinetic threats that we face, they have their roots in the formative period of the conflict that for the regime in Iran was like our Vietnam, our World War II rolled up into one, which was the Iran-Iraq War, which is the longest conventional war of the 20th century, by the way, very often forgotten. But that's where the regime resurrected the drone program. Resurrected the nuclear program. That's the first use of Iranian drones. That's the procurement era for ballistic missiles. That's the era of developing transnational terrorist apparatus. And that's the area of maritime aggression and threats to freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and Persian Gulf from the Iranians. So we have just been dealing with the spokes of these threats. But now I think, given the military success, the president has created the space to deal with the hub. The question is, will we walk through that door? And will we walk through that door with a president who very much understands the overstretch and the burdens of the strive versus struggle of America in the post 9/11 Middle East? And will he be able to do it in a way that taps into the strengths and minimizes the weaknesses of the Iranian diaspora in many of the Western democracies of the world today? And will he be able to do it with a much more risk-tolerant major U.S. military and political partner in the Middle East, which is Israel? So this is still very much a question, but I see it still very much as an opportunity.
Thanks, Behnam. And in a little while, we'll get more into the regime change aspect of all of this. But Victoria, staying on the topic of America's goals, I was hoping that you could discuss what messages you believe were sent to Russia, China, and North Korea. And do you believe that perhaps this was one of the factors that Trump considered in his decision, although, of course, as John pointed out, none of us can get in his head. Do you think that this was enough to deter our enemies? Because Russia's former president, Dmitry Medvedev, claimed earlier this week that multiple countries are ready to directly supply Iran with nuclear warheads in response to the U.S. strike. And that leads me to wonder why that wasn't done even before now. And I also, I point out that Trump greenlighted Iran's ability to sell oil directly to China, seemingly providing Iran with an economic lifeline. And some of it, all this seems a bit schizophrenic, and it circles back again to nobody knows what's going on in his mind. But I am wondering what the Russia-China takeaway was from all of this, and what the impact of this has to the axis of resistance that was Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. So thoughts on any of this?
Reagan. And the day after Medvedev made those comments, Putin came out publicly and denounced them and said that Russia had no intent. There's like cleanup in aisle 4. And so they backtracked from that pretty quickly.
Victoria,
And
you're frozen.
am I still frozen?
No, now you're good.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. No, but Putin retracted or recanted those comments by Medvedev, said Russia was not planning to give Iran a nuclear weapon. China's been pretty clear that they're not going to do that either. I think the North Koreans would be happy to sell one, but as we all know, their equipment isn't the best, and so that's probably not what the Iranians would want anyway. And I think the silence from all of them on this, and the fact that they haven't done anything material to help Iran. I mean, Russia is somewhat limited because of the Ukraine war. They don't have the kind of access through Syria that they used to have. And China really can't project power the way we can. And that is, I think, the critical message there is we can do something you didn't know we could do it, and you can't do it. So that is very helpful. And I think on top of that, yes, that is a very specific deterrent, particularly for a Chinese incursion against Taiwan. But for Russia, the NATO defense spending increase is their worst nightmare. If the Europeans make good on that, that makes it so much harder for him to look at taking a bite out of Poland or Estonia or Finland or any country with a border sharing his that is a NATO member. So I think those two things in conjunction send a terrific message to Crink. And there was really good reporting in the Wall Street Journal. I think it was yesterday, might have been the day before, about the fissures within that grouping. I hate to call it an alliance. I think of it like Spectre from James Bond. So that seems to be weaker than we might have thought 6 months ago because of these actions.
Thanks, Victoria. John, I'm going to turn back to you, and I want to talk about the Iranian proxies, because people tend to forget that this phase of the Iran-Israel war arguably began, excuse me, on October 7th, and was initiated by Hamas. Since that time, Hamas has been devastated, although not out. Unfortunately, there were 7 Israeli soldiers who were killed earlier this week in Gaza. Hezbollah, we know its capabilities have been severely impacted. I don't know if I'd use the word obliterated. And the other proxies in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, the Houthis, have been quiet. In fact, it's been reported that Khamenei asked Hezbollah to get involved in attacking Israel, and they didn't abide by their puppet master. So the dynamic among the Islamic Republic and its terrorist groups that it's been funding for decades has clearly changed, or at least it appears to, for today. Do you see any possibility of the rebuilding of any of these terrorist organizations? If so, where would the funding and the weaponry come from? And do you have any insights on what all of this has meant for the hostages suffering in Gaza and the mindset of whatever is left of Hamas leadership there? And any thoughts on the Houthis in Yemen and whether the peace will hold in Lebanon and whether Lebanon might eventually join the Abraham Accords?
Wow, that's a lot, Lauri. Let me, I may or may not answer all those questions, but let me throw out some thoughts. First, of course, what you talked about. I think the big picture here is this entire strategy that Iran has been pursuing, at least for the last 25 or 30 years, this ring of fire as a critical pillar of Iran, both Iran's offensive and defensive strategy to protect Iran, has completely gone up in ashes and smoke as a result of Israeli military operations since October 7th. I think you're right. This all traces back to October 7th. October 7th, whether or not Sinwar jumped the gun and initiated well before Iran and Hezbollah were prepared. Important to remember, October the 7th was an integral part and piece of a grand Iranian concrete operational plan to actually destroy the Jewish state. All of that stuff about death to Israel was not simply rhetoric and some kind of long-term, distant, theoretical project. It was very, very real, as crazy as it sounds. And October 7th was part of that. October 7th was the deepest depths of Israel's collapse of Israeli deterrence. And now, within the space of 20 months, Israel is clearly, as its deterrent power, its hegemonic regional role, as clear and evident as it's ever been in the state's entire history. It's probably one of the most profound historical reversals of a nation's prospects in such a short amount of time as we've ever witnessed. That's absolutely critical, and the collapse of this pillar of Iranian deterrent power in the region and its rising hegemony of this ring of fire that again was really the dog that didn't bark, that Iran had depended so heavily on as part of its strategy to insulate Iran, the head of the octopus, from its malign activities in the region. That's gone, while the missile power had some effects on Israel over the course of the last these interactions with Israel. It's largely been defeated. It hasn't done what Iran thought it could do, and now you've had this dramatic setback both to the missile and the nuclear program. This entire Iranian project of the last 30 years has ended in disaster. It is collapsing. Iran has brought complete ruin and devastation and humiliation to this great civilization and peoples. That was evident even before the last 2 weeks. It's more evident than ever now. We clearly stand at this inflection point where we thought we'd been in a period almost for 25, 30 years of rising Iranian hegemony in the region. And I think now we see that we are at a point where we can consolidate a new era of permanent decline for the Islamic Republic and the axis of resistance if we don't succumb to a degree of euphoria, of complacency, of lack of attention, getting our eyes diverted to other issues and problems. Got to be focused on this problem set, driving home this success, keeping our foot on the pedal here, particularly with getting Iran done, and then exploiting this larger effort that the president, that I talked about before, that the president has identified for transforming the regional balance of power in favor of the United States and our partners in the region. And part of that, keeping the pressure on Iran, is going to be, making sure it cannot rebuild. I think rebuilding that project is going to be difficult for a whole variety of reasons, that ring of fire in particular, especially if the United States is able to exploit some of these major opportunities that I do see in places like Lebanon and even in Syria as part of this larger package with the Saudis. That would be completely dramatic and completely neutralize a lot of what any Iranian ambition to somehow go back and create a Ring of Fire 2.0, which again I think is they may try it if they're stupid enough. I think there's a lot of reasons why they will have difficulty doing that, particularly if we have a purposeful strategy to prevent any kind of reconstitution of this Iranian hegemonic aspiration that they have in all its elements: the Ring of Fire, the nuclear program, the ballistic missile project as well. I think that's all very much within our power to do now. The United States working together with this obvious incipient coalition of very strong, serious, and capable partners that we have between Israel, the pragmatic Sunni Arab states that have a lot of resources and a lot of incentives to be part of this project to dramatically take a great leap forward in terms of the advancing the region's overall security and stability and prosperity.
John, you covered a lot there. I know my question was pretty intense. Then, your FDD colleague, Hussein Abdul Hussein, posted last Sunday that he believes Iran will take the defeat to save the regime because the U.S. told Iran that regime change was not in the plans. I don't think that anybody believes that Khamenei is a changed man despite being defeated, as John just described. But you I do want to talk about regime change. There was rumors that the officials in Iran were considering removing him as the supreme leader. And then there's the $1 million question, which is where are the Iranian people? Now, I understand, and I want you to share with our audience what's going on the streets in Iran, because it's my understanding that there are police who are rounding up anybody who even considers protesting. There are people being thrown in jail. I know that Israel struck Evin prison. I'm wondering whether there were any opposition leaders who might have gotten out that could be working underground to start some sort of movement on the streets for regime change. And I also would like to ask you that if Khamenei is forced out or if he's assassinated by Israel, the US, or others, what are your thoughts on who would replace him? Reza Pahlavi, of course, is being discussed quite a lot, but there was a Wall Street Journal column this past weekend, I believe, that talked about how he might have a credibility problem. Um, and that person who wrote that article actually concluded if Khamenei is killed, his successor will likely struggle to unify the regime's various factions, much of which are armed. It is a grim picture for both Iranians and the world. So, Behnam, do you agree? And maybe also touch on the IRGC and the role that they would play in all of this.
Sure, that's quite the mouthful. I was hoping I could escape with something easy like ballistic missile malfunctioning, but let me begin with the top, Lori, and work my way down because there's a lot there, and dare I say, it's a very calorie-rich conversation to have. The first thing about what Hussein mentioned in regime survival, sometimes in the West, particularly, and I'm going to be honest, with our friends, people who think like all of us, we are the ones who are ideological about the regime's ideology. What do I mean by that? Meaning the regime has proven in the past 46 years that it can totally logically, rationally, and pragmatically pursue a rational and pragmatic approach to a highly ideological end. Therefore, if you desire a highly ideological end state, everything else for you is actually non-ideological. And the highly ideological end state that the regime has, first, is its survival imperative. And from that flows the thriving imperative, the acting on their ideology. Only once are they secure can they do a lot of this stuff. So the priority, the primus inter pares, is the security and the survival of the regime. And here I fear, this is not about saying the word regime change or not. This is about how do you play to the edge against your adversary. And absolutely, I understand the Iranian attack on Al Udeid and the American non-response and the log rolling of that into a ceasefire was choreographed, and the Iranians tipped it off, and it was in some ways more akin to January 2020, but even less risky than January 2020 because we've lived through that movie before with the missile attacks on U.S. bases. All of this to me proves that even with the commanding heights of the IRGC deracinated, even with the lack of electronic communications between Iranian political and military officials, even with Israeli full air superiority across the Iranian airspace, even with Israelis launching drone attacks from within Iranian territory, hunting the only capable method of military response the Iranians have, which is their ballistic missiles. Even with all of this, Khamenei, an 86-year-old from a bunker, understood America and American hesitancy and resistancy better than we did. And he played to the edge. And he knew that we might not go to the edge, certainly not in this round. And for him, the victory lap is indeed surviving. They're going to try to maximize that. I mean, it certainly looked like opposite day in Tehran when Khamenei gave his speech. He claimed there was a victory against America, victory against Israel, and victory for the Iranian people for being unified. The Iranian people are not unified. Iran lost to Israel. Iran lost to America. But at least he understood that there is still a way for him to try to play up and play to the American hesitancy of a wider war, the American hesitancy of being sucked in. We talked about that sucked in the first question, sucked into something larger and not wanting to have to pay costs for not just decapitation, but facilitating political transition. And this has largely been the Islamic Republic's power, is to use our responsibility and our restraint against us, and they can threaten to do more simply by being a more destructive power. So that is where I fear Khamenei read the room right, and that is where I fear even the post-strike conversation is missing. And I'm just being as honest as possible. The post-strike conversation, for instance, about the 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium is absolutely not, in my view, about weaponization. It is instead absolutely about regime survival. It is a bargaining tool. It is a deterrent that can deter wider entry into the conflict. Pre-strike, Iran would escalate to deter or raise the cost to us by growing its nuclear program. Now it just had most of its nuclear program taken away. So now what's the way that you threaten America, or you deter greater entry into the war, or you prevent what John talked about, which is the military campaign to prevent reconstitution? You reduce the eyes, you reduce the monitoring, you raise the risks. Iran is trying to create Iraq between 98 to 2003 for us. Once you see that, about kicking out inspectors, about not knowing where the material is, once you see that, you begin to have to guess. And once you start choosing targets based on guessing, you will get sucked into something much larger. So this is how Khamenei is trying to secure his regime. It is by reducing the available eyes on his program. Doesn't matter how penetrated he is, but reducing the available eyes and increasing the risks to not getting it right the first time. Because we have gotten it right, but there's a chance that something could be, misread, or we may not know where something is, or we may not play to the edge the way Khamenei will play to the edge. And that has been his secret sauce to survival. He is the Middle East's longest serving contemporary autocrat, 36 years at least at the helm, if my math is correct, as the Islamic Republic's most powerful person, probably longer because my math is incorrect usually. But this is someone who is ideological, but has never really gambled that much. He stepped out, but whenever he's been smacked down, he goes back down. And he's hoping that once he's back down now, the political imperative to foot stomp, to curb stomp, to do whatever, will diminish over time. And the political appetite to monitor and be judicious and be like a hawk and care about boring things like IAEA managed access will erode over time. So unfortunately, I see him moving towards, and it could end poorly for him, but I see him moving towards trying to generate the risks that Saddam generated between 98 and 2003. Whereas on the home front, the risks he's generating for his population, and what, you mentioned the Iranian opposition, for example, what they are worried about, particularly when you had pre-strike a significant evolution in Iranian nationalist discourse being essentially pro-Israel, given the boom and bust of cycle of street protests since 2009 that have been saying, not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life only for Iran. And Iran's clerical class only very recently, and too little too late, trying to co-opt this nationalist rhetoric. I mean, from a bunker, Khamenei used the word, I think, Iran or Iranian 22 times, and nation or national like 17, 18 times. These are not words that Iran's ideologues, that Iran's Islamist autocrats like to use. But these are words that prove that these guys understand that everything is on the line, and they're going to try to do everything they can to have the regime survive. Now, to the heart of the opposition, and that's like grabbing the third rail with both hands. It is going to be very difficult to try to poll, if you will, what the popularity level of one person versus another one is, particularly during a war zone. But it's certainly clear that at least the son of the late Shah of Iran has had a rise in popularity from 2017 to present, when you've had really an evolution in the way the street has contested the state. Traditionally, the street in Iran, which has sought political change as peacefully as possible, has ironically tried to work through the ballot box in the first 2 decades of the Islamic Republic. It's ironic because a ballot box in an authoritarian system doesn't really get you much. It's a rigged process. But with the collapse of reform, a decade of labor strikes, the overpromise and underdelivery of the JCPOA and quote unquote the moderation of Rouhani, the population moved towards revolution. And in that period of time to present, Reza Pahlavi and really like external diaspora has played a much larger role in shaping the nationalist discourse on the street. And that is exactly why, even between April and October, Iranians were critical of Israel's strikes, not because they were critical of Israel, but because they wanted Israel to finish the job. And you even see now, again, in the dissident and diaspora community, those who are, again, staunchly pro-Israel, being critical of Israel because now they are left essentially defenseless. It got to what Victoria said, because the Iranian population now fears, rightly, and all dissident and diaspora and pro-democracy forces fear now that because there has been a military success, we may find ourselves in the Iraq 91 world, where we take a lap on the military successes. We may try to encourage something from afar, and a wounded totalitarian style regime may not have the military wherewithal to go abroad and contest us or contest Israel, but will have more than enough repressive apparatus to really crack skulls at home. And when you see, within the first few hours of the Iranian government talking about the deaths of its IRGC generals at the hands of the Israelis, and in the obituaries of those generals, pausing to say, do not listen to foreign media, do not post any pro-Israel content. When you see the Iranian judiciary being one of the most active institutions during this 12-day period, talking about the fines and the charges and the arrests that you will face if you do anything deemed to be against the state, when you see the arbitrary checkpoints or hear about the arbitrary checkpoints in major urban centers like Tehran for people fleeing, the regime is trying to win on the home front because it is still trying to survive. And that will mean a very messy, and I hate to say it, much more violent next generation of repression coming the Iranian people's way. And now is the time to get really creative and really clever. Now it probably is too late, but it is late, but it's not too late for everyone who has talked about supporting the Iranian people in practice to do something, in principle, to do something in practice. And that comes from identifying the apparatus of repression. The Israelis have struck much of the apparatus of repression, but they haven't really translated that for the street. And I actually think that which you want, or that which was at the bottom of your question, which is how will this manifest itself in another cycle of protests against the street, that can really only happen once it's clear that the shooting war has stopped and the fog goes down and the Iranian people understand that there is no snap back to normal because there never really was a normal to begin with. That is the period in time. It's often political protests come between elevated expectations or disheartened dreams. And it's in that period of time when you have people go back to the capital, back to a sense of normalcy, and they see the Islamic Republic's manifest failures. The regime sacrificed everything on the altar of security and defending everything and defending the apparatus and using missiles and investing in the nuclear program. And because they were so all in on this, the regime would not permit even a little bit of a 22-year-old Iranian Kurdish woman's hair to show. And they used violence against her. So now is the time for the population to be able to create the political space to say, what the hell were you doing?
Thanks, Ben. I'm sure we could spend an entire hour discussing all of that, but you did a great job of summarizing. And I just, we have about 10 minutes left, and I have another question for each of you. We're going to do another round, and I just wish we had more time because you're all so insightful. Victoria, I want to ask you about a report that Heritage had issued several months ago. It was entitled U.S.-Israel Strategy from Special Relationship to Strategic Partnership 2029 to 2047. And one of the issues that was raised in that analysis addressed the need for Israel to wean itself off of U.S. aid. I think when people hear that, they have a knee-jerk reaction that's very negative, and they don't understand what you're getting at. So I'd like you to spend a couple minutes, if you would, talking about the report and in the context of where we started this conversation, which was a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, how Heritage's position on Israel aid is distinguishable from the leftists and isolationists who do lack an understanding of the need for that strong relationship.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. That was kind of an extraordinary episode because when a think tank releases a report, there generally isn't a whole lot of activity. They tend, so we were excited that people. It did lead a lot of people to actually read the report. It was a setup hit job, and we know who did it. So it's that is what it is. But it has really created, I think, a powerful conversation around this issue. So the key to the process that we outline in the report is that it is contingent on a whole series of assumptions that we lay out about Israel's integration into the broader Middle East and concurrent expansion of the Israeli economy. It's essentially modeled on what Netanyahu did in the 90s, getting off of the economic assistance we used to provide by expanding the economy and making it unnecessary. And so the period between, essentially the 20 years leading up to the centenary of the foundation of modern Israel, obviously the centenary of the U.S.-Israel alliance, that this is a glide path of decades that we can spend, and the formula that we propose is essentially to plus up the security assistance for the first 5 years of this period, to sort of prime the pump, if you will, for Israel, and then to start shifting 250 million a year out of foreign military financing into foreign military sales. And one idea that we've had is that those dollars could go into investments in joint programs, so that would still be part of the security partnership, and that if this were all successful, and there's nothing set in stone about the 2047 date. It's a nice date. It would be good to get it done by the centenary, but if things are going slower, there's no reason you can't slow down that process. And that it will create an Israel, that we are seeing sort of a forecast of in this action, where they took independent action to end a problem. The Iranian missile program is a problem for us. It's not an existential threat yet, the way it is for Israel. So they took care of their existential threat, and we took care of our existential threat. And as John said, we are witnessing just the utter exposure of Iran's incompetency and fecklessness in all of these areas. And so I think as we discuss the U.S.-Israel partnership going forward, this is a critical issue. There was a whole session on it at the recent AI Plus Expo, primarily about tech partnership going forward, but very much about the future of the alliance. So this I think will be one of the key conversations that'll happen in Washington and Jerusalem over the next 2 years.
I think it's an important report, and I hope it, despite how it was laid out initially or launched initially, I hope that it does gain some traction. I hope it is gaining traction. John, I want to ask you about Turkey. And are you concerned about Erdogan's animus towards Israel and it possibly replacing Iran as a regional threat to Israel's security? Erdogan has invested years of financing and supporting Hamas. John Schanzer actually noted that, quote, he transformed Turkey into a global financial hub for the terrorist group. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the threats that Turkey, as a NATO member, I might add, might be posing to Israel, and how concerned we should be about that.
I'm always concerned about Erdogan and worried about how complicated that relationship is with a NATO partner that seems to position itself less as a full-fledged ally of the United States than somewhere in between East and West and Islamism and free societies. But I think a lot of it is just in our hands in how we handle Erdogan. Obviously, yes, he became a major benefactor of Hamas, but as far as I can tell, as long as Israel does what it needs to do in Gaza, doesn't take its eye off the ball, doesn't fall prey to a concepcia that what Hamas was doing in Gaza for the past 17 years posed a very manageable third-tier threat. As long as Israel keeps its eye on the ball, as it has tried to do the last 20 months in establishing a new security order in Hamas that sees Hamas as a true and potentially existential threat that needs to have resources and attention and energy devoted to establishing security for Israel as it relates to Gaza. I think there's not much Turkey can do. I think, again, another story of what happened over the last couple of weeks was not only the complete irrelevance and fecklessness and inability of major powers like Russia or China to have any kind of real diplomatic, much less military sway on what happened. They were on the sidelines, bystanders to an American Israeli show of what just happened. Turkey was very much in that camp as well. There wasn't much they could do. I'm sure they didn't like this unbelievable demonstration of Israeli power in particular on their borders, and yet it's happened. I'm sure they despise the fact that even though they were responsible in large part for helping get Ahmed al-Shara into the presidential palace in Damascus, Israel proceeded to use the next several months to completely decimate and have a free hand in Syria, to destroy the Syrian military and lay the groundwork for this air corridor through Syria and Iraq to Iran that we just saw over the last 2 weeks. Not much they could do about it, nothing they could do about the American demonstration of power to destroy the Iranian, the last parts of Iran's nuclear project at Fordo. And I noticed that Erdogan was rushing to have his bilateral with the president of the United States at NATO just a few days later. So I think if we play our cards right between the United States and Israel, the problem of Turkey is entirely manageable. And in particular in Syria, where I think the threat to Israel potentially was greatest from an assertion of real Turkish regional power right on Israel's doorstep. I think the president's move since May to really take the Syrian card away from Turkey and to begin framing it in terms of the Abraham Accords and potential for this regional solution that America oversees with the Saudis, with Lebanon, with Syria included, with Israel now engaging. We hear with Syria every day on the possibility of a better relationship. I think if we play our cards right and keep our eyes focused on what we want strategically in the region, devote some time and energy and resources to that, together with Israel and our moderate Sunni Arab partners in particular, I think the challenge, a genuine challenge, is that a difficult Erdogan, an Islamist Muslim Brotherhood-oriented Erdogan poses to U.S. and Israeli interests in the region is entirely manageable and within our hands.
Thank you. Ben, with the couple of minutes that we have left, I would love for you to talk about what you hope to see in a deal that the U.S. is negotiating with Iran. Obviously, I think IAEA inspections is critical, but do you think that recognizing Israel's right to exist should be a part of that? And what else do you want to see in a big, beautiful deal, as Trump would say?
To be brutally honest, I'm interested in, the phrase from victory to victory or from strength to strength. I'm looking to have the Islamic Republic go from defeat to defeat. There is certainly a temptation here to front load a list of political demands, to put that list of political demands in front of the Islamic Republic and have them sign it. But I'm not particularly interested in the Islamic Republic signing something or saying something that it can politically or in reality reverse with facts on the ground, given that it retains the apparatus of aggression and suppression. It can reverse its commitment to that tomorrow. I think what you really want to foot stomp is if the president still, and this is up to him, but still, if he's interested in some kind of a diplomatic resolution or solution to this crisis, it has to be all about, first and foremost, making sure that the real battle damage assessment will be needing to come from the IAEA. Every ounce of uranium that was not struck or destroyed or was squirreled away somewhere has to be accounted for. So the real thing now is to use military muscle to pave the pathway for the IAEA, to get the answers to the outstanding questions that led the regime to be in non-compliance anyway, to get some real insight as to what happened to these facilities. Did they collapse on themselves? Is the canisterized uranium moved? What's in storage in the tunnels in Isfahan versus Natanz? What is up with this alleged third Iranian enrichment site? My fear is here, if you don't have the IAEA access, you will be again in that blind spot, the Iraq 1998 to 2003, with the only caveat being, well, if the Israelis know where the generals slept and what their emergency procedures are, well, then maybe they know where they store these canisters as well, and for that reason we can sleep safely at night. But for me, who's someone trying to prevent Iran from becoming in the position of if there's state collapse or something or regime collapse or something, there's a lot of things to worry about. But one of the things you're going to have to worry about as a U.S. foreign policy watcher from a distance is not having an AQCon network on steroids with what's left of the centrifuge production and rotor assembly and these boring things that may have been in warehouses that could help the regime reconstitute after it feels sufficiently confident that it has a survival pathway. So the president, obviously, if he still wants some kind of diplomatic resolution, solution, something on paper, needs to press for the regime agreeing to have given up enrichment and reprocessing and to be working towards, full compliance with the IEA and the NPT. But I think the regime is moving exact opposite direction. So I think it would be, foolish to hang our hat on just a piece of paper providing us with the security dividends that we need at this point in time, because the Iranian Guardian Council, which oversees the Iranian parliament, has just agreed to the bill to suspend Iran's cooperation with the IAEA. Rafael Grossi has provided really critical information that the Iranians fear is now targeting information. And with whatever's left of the program, that probably would be struck anyway. The Iranians have every incentive to lie, cheat, and steal, and then essentially to say things on the back end that we would have a hard time verifying. If the Iranians 3 weeks from now, in a bid to deter snapback, say that we have a new enrichment site, how are we going to know? Unless national technical means and the Israeli amazing intelligence capability, which is true and there, but how are we going to have like the full official stamp of approval? So there may be a temptation to ask for a lot with this deal. Certainly, Khamenei is in no position to not deliver, but also Khamenei is somebody who I think welcomed a little bit of American entry into this conflict, because if he sensed his regime was going down, and this gets to that that deep ideological anti-Semitic sentiment. If he sensed his regime was going down, he wants it to go down at the hands of the world's sole superpower, not at the hands of the resurrected Jewish state. And there was a world in which Khamenei wanted that. And now there may be a world in which Khamenei may try to play or placate America to try to put distance between America and Israel after, Trump just showed that there was not an ounce of daylight despite New York Times reporting from April and May. So I would be very weary about, even if Khamenei agrees to a deal at this point in time, what his ultimate plan is. Because again, this guy is a survivor. His legacy, believe it or not, after being the Middle East's longest serving autocrat, is not an atomic Islamic Republic. His legacy is simply preserving, protecting, and defending whatever you call the Islamic Republic. And the counter-proliferation mission of the United States and the military success that Donald Trump has had needs to be always seen through the larger lens of what does this do for the larger counter-regime mission? Because the regime has never forgotten its larger counter-America, counter-Israel mission, of where nuclear is just one tool in that toolkit.
Thank you so much. John and Victoria, do you have anything to add to that before we go? I just, I want to give you guys the last word as well, if you have anything to add. Victoria, you look like you have a thought.
No, that was a really, I think, insightful and helpful overview. I just learned so much from that about Khamenei's thought process. So I think I'll let Behnam have the last word on that one.
Well, thank you all so much for joining. I know how busy you are, and I'm sure you're running off to do some TV appearance or interview for some newspaper, and I think we are very lucky to have had the three of you on today. I've learned, as Victoria said, so much from all three of you, as I'm sure our audience has, and I just hope the recording goes far and wide, because this was really terrific. So thank you all again. Thanks to everybody for joining. Have a good afternoon.
Have a great weekend.